Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Hello, and thank you for being a listener. Before we get into the episode, I wanted to let you know about a special offer being given to the new warehouse listener. That's you. Mobile Robot Guide is offering 10% off just for you when you purchase the Warehouse Solutions Buyer's Guide. Just use promo code WarehousePod10 at mobilerobotguide.com. That's WarehousePod10. This is your comprehensive guide for all things autonomous mobile robots. That's WarehousePod10. And for more info, go to thenewwarehouse.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to be bringing you my guest, Matt Yearling. He is the CEO at Pinc. You guys may remember Pinc. We talked to them prior to Modex when they were getting into a little different business, but they've switched things up a little bit, focusing on YMS, Yard Management Solutions. So we're going to talk to Matt, and he's going to give us some information about what exactly it is that Pinc does when it comes to YMS and their yard management solutions. And we're going to talk to them a little bit about how that's kind of evolved, how they've become such a market leader in YMS, and also kind of what is in store for the future of Pinc as well, and how they've been doing over the entire pandemic situation. So Matt, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having me today.
Definitely. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for talking to me. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Pinc, for those that may not be familiar that are listening, what it is you guys do, and tell us a little bit about your products.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would characterize ourselves as a mature startup. We've been in business since 2004. And back in that time frame, our founder had a really interesting piece of technology, a very robust, low cost platform, an IoT platform that was able to localize assets in space. And when he was looking for applications of this technology, went inside the warehouse, went in marine terminals, and really latched onto this opportunity for inland distribution around yards, because whilst marine terminals, there's probably a couple of hundred port operators, terminals themselves in the United States. There are over 100,000 manufacturing plants and warehouses that have some resemblance of yard operations. And what people don't realize is every time you see a trailer go down the street, with a truck pulling it, for everyone that you see on the street, on the freeway, there's 4 in a facility somewhere unhooked with inventory in it. And it's when it's in that state, people kind of lose track of inventory, or don't necessarily efficiently move that around in the facility, or use it as an extension of the warehouse, or it's feeding a production line. I mean, yards in themselves are used for many different purposes,
right.
And it's typically a blind spot between transportation and warehouse, and it's one of those areas that is still emerging. So we started in 2004, and we've seen this market grow over the years, and now it's becoming much more of a relevant solution in the market. And because we have this particular technology platform that we utilize, the benefits really favor those very large companies that have very large operations, manufacturing and distribution operations, and that's really the type of customers that we've historically focused on, and have grown very nicely over the years as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell from where we are today. And the future looks bright. Absolutely.
Definitely interesting stuff. So it's a really interesting stat that you had there about, for every truck that's on the road, there's 4 more trailers in a yard somewhere, too. So, yard management is such a big deal, I think, because especially as volume continues to grow, you get more trailers in the yards get bigger as warehouses are getting bigger, distribution centers are getting bigger, and it's important to track those assets. So, 2004, though, I'm thinking back to 2004 in my life, and I think the concept of the Internet of Things is pretty early on, right? So I'm curious, very technologically centered company, and your solution is very technologically centered as well. So I'm curious, from that initial technology with the Internet of Things and the implementation there, tracking the assets, how has it kind of evolved from a technology standpoint? Because now I think you guys are utilizing some artificial intelligence and machine learning things as well. How has the technology evolved over the last 16 years now?
Yeah, there's so much opportunity to utilize all of these technology elements that exist. So there's a few elements that we're using, but to your point, our core engine is really focused on automating the orchestration of workflow. And because if you look at the vast majority, as I say, people say how many warehouses are there in North America, and people say it's probably around 20,000. It's like, well, what you're missing is all the manufacturing,
right?
And you're missing there's a ton more that you're missing. And it's interesting when I talk to some companies, they say, oh yeah, I didn't really think about that. And so it is an area that lacks technology enablement and lacks sophistication. When you ask a company how they're managing their yard operations, they'll say, well, it's either maybe a module in my WMS or a spreadsheet. And the real problem is that the vast majority of the time is there's a significant amount of exceptions going on in the facility. Right, people are showing up not where they expected to show up, and then how you're going to optimize your dock doors, etc. So, and the style of operations in North America are predominantly drop as opposed to live in Europe. So there's different style of operations, and more focus on distribution going forward, especially with the acceleration of online sales. Right, especially around the pandemic is accelerating that.
Right.
So the key point here is most of the focus for us is taking fingers off the keyboard, letting the system manage exceptions, and with our AI and automation engine, really focused on letting the system automate all of the decisions associated with optimizing your equipment, process, and people, and how is that orchestrated in the context of the facility between the 4 fences of the facility and the 4 walls, but going out beyond that, right? So having the ability to take information from TMS systems, WMS systems, real-time transportation visibility, manufacturing execution systems. So there's a number of opportunity with integrations and other data sources to emphasize that. And then in terms of progress on sensors in general, well, so there's a lot of opportunity with computer vision. We've done a lot of work with computer vision with other products that we've had in the past. And how do you embed that type of technology into a solution? There's a lot of sensors that we can leverage, whether that's GPS, mobile broadband, RFID, Bluetooth, lots of different sensor technologies, but also the power of computer vision is also going to be there in operations, and we're seeing a lot of that as well. So there's so much technology that can be put in place to basically make this a seamless transition between transportation through the yard to the warehouse, and that's really what we're focused on, and automating the processes associated.
We'll be back after a quick break. You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Right. Interesting. So I'm curious, you said a couple times in there about, I guess, managing the exceptions, like letting the system manage the exception. So can you give a example, I guess, of an exception and then how the system is going to automate managing that?
Yeah, well, so the whole operation, everybody is managing a fluid operation, right?
Right.
So an example, and every industry is different in the way that they operate. But for example, that if I were describing an e-commerce operation, really what they care about the most is outbound velocity, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm e-commerce, it's like, okay, I've got these orders, I need to fulfill these orders, I need to stage them, then I need to get them loaded on the relevant carrier and get them out the facility as fast as possible. So in that context, managing carrier empties on site proactively is important. So how do you know what orders are going to be distributed to what carriers, and how many empties do you need to have on site, and what is that pool? What is your contractually obligated pool to manage per carrier, and what is your availability, and when is that availability coming online based on what's on site and what's coming in? So there's a lot of complexity around making that happen. So that's one example. In the context of grocery, they have waves of goods coming into the distribution, from their suppliers, and then they have waves of product going to stores. And how do you stage and do that? And it's a similar problem, but mostly around a private fleet, mostly matching power units to outbound to deliver on time to the stores. So that's really looking at. It's kind of like air traffic control for the yard, right? I also like to describe it to people. It's like we're like a telematic system for the yard, but it's also with complexities associated with information from other data sources making decisions on your behalf.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it sounds very, I guess, complex, but the technology itself, I mean, seems like it streamlines and makes everything more efficient. So there's complexity happening within the technology, but for the worker, there's not really much to worry about in terms of complexity, which I think is the key to utilizing technology and leveraging it in an impactful way. Absolutely. For your operation.
Yeah. So it's a case of you set up business rules, let the system operate. When an exception occurs, the exception compounds and gets worse when humans get in the way. And
humans are terrible.
they get in the way. And in the context of a facility, you do things a whole lot more efficient, right? So our value proposition at a facility level is, hey, we can operate that facility faster, better, cheaper, and with 30% less operating expense. So that would be around people and equipment and better process execution within that facility. So that's the value proposition at that level. But the other thing that I think is more meaningful and what people don't necessarily understand is what is the value that you can drive at the corporate enterprise level for transportation. And that is more meaningful because, if you're the head of logistics, 2/3 of your expense is associated with transportation.
Yeah.
And it's a bigger spend, and that's what monopolizes the conversation. But if you had all of your nodes on the network illuminated and automated, the impact on your transportation is more than 10%. And only big companies are starting to realize that. They're starting to realize it in terms of efficiencies and velocity and delivering on commitments to your end customer. But it's also it also has huge impacts in cost reduction as well as customer service by having that blind spot totally illuminated for the purposes of the enterprise. And so it is more than 10%. In fact, we've got some studies and some case studies, some industry studies and some case studies that are supporting those numbers coming out in the coming months. So watch the space on that.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because, you look at technology and, I think the key to leveraging it, like you're talking about, is you have the ability now to take a step back and look at the bigger picture because you're not managing every move, managing, the day to day. And like you said, people are managing on spreadsheet and all that. Like, you're so worried about making sure the right things are happening. You don't get the chance to take the step back and see where can you make gains at and where can you create more efficiency. So the technology really helps you to do that. So you're talking a little bit there about, some of the gains and what you can get out of it. I'm curious, from a customer perspective, what can a customer really expect when you're implementing the YMS or the yard management system? Especially, I guess, talk to the customer that maybe has never had a yard management system. What can the expectation be when they're implementing something?
Yeah, so the most important first and foremost, every customer is a little different in terms of the pain points associated with what problems they're trying to solve. The other important factor is the expectation on value, and time to value is important, right? So as I mentioned earlier, you should expect at least 30% increase in productivity and expense reduction within the facility. And what really fundamentally happens is that system pays back within the first year. So what typically happens is every year, the GM of a facility is looking at his budget and says, "Here's my operating expense," and we can say, "Look, look how you're operating. This is how you're managing this facility today. We could do this faster, better, cheaper, make it more efficient, and we could do that in a very limited amount of time." So for us to implement a system, it's not a complex TMS, WMS, ERP implementation. It's a 3 to 4 week process over a 6 to 8 week period, and it's a very simple implementation. It's basically saying, let's understand how you operate. Let's set up how you operate in a system, and let's run that system faster, better, cheaper than how you do it today. And pretty much that's how it's done. And then of course, then your question is, to get even more benefit, rather than just run it standalone, how do I integrate with my systems to increase the level of automation? I mean, we've had customers implement even without IT. We can implement without IT. Because of the way that we set up the system and how it communicates, and it's all cloud-based, and mobile broadband is the most pervasive connectivity mechanism that exists. If you can imagine, for example, yard operations, the Wi-Fi coverage outside is poor compared to the Wi-Fi coverage you see inside, and that inside is never really that good anyway. But outside, what is your primary compute device? It's your mobile phone. Well, we just use the same networks to be able to transact in a secure way. So it's very easy to set up and deploy, and time to value is very quick. So that's why it resonates for those making the decision, and it resonates from the perspective of it's very sticky, right? So the retention of the customer retention is very high because of the value created for our customers. So that's what you expect. People want to get to value as fast as possible, and they're trying to solve problems, right? So it could be around they could have a gate velocity problem. They could have trucks lined up on the street. They got to solve gate velocity issues, which we help solve. It could be lack of exposure or awareness of what's going on in the yard. They're hunting around for assets. that's impacting productivity. They're not executing, or they're meeting their objectives around scheduled departure, arrival times. These are all problems that our customers are struggling with time and time again. Or it could be, we have organized labor, and we don't necessarily feel like we're operating as efficiently as we could, or we need to instrument the operations such that we can have at least a conversation about what's actually happening in the facility. Right. And so we can replay history and show exactly what's going on and how people are executing and how they're hitting KPIs. So these tools are useful. It's not like Big Brother is watching. It's a case of making sure that we're all working together and focus on the right metrics to run the operation in the business. And the system helps from that perspective as well.
Definitely, yeah. And I think too, it's you mentioned the Big Brother's not watching, but at the same time, it's helping to make the employees and workers' job easier too, because they're not getting confused, and it's not being as much for them to keep track of, because the system is doing a lot of that. So I'm curious, could you take us through, I guess, how the system would work, starting from when a truck arrives at the facility? How can you take us through the process there of how the system would track that until it got to the dock and then eventually left the facility?
Yeah, no, look, and it's ever changing based on the customer need, right? So, we have customers. Obviously, some customers have their lanes planned weeks in advance, right? Or their schedules planned weeks in advance, and so we know pretty much what's arriving. So it's not a surprise when it shows up. So another part of what's going on and the capability that we have is around electronic bill of lading. So there's a whole lot of opportunities to accelerate the process of validating documents and making sure that we've got everything captured from a gate transaction. Once again, gate velocity is important, and getting that asset to where it needs to be appropriately. So we also got situations where a truck driver is coming up to a facility, and as he's coming to the facility, if it's a live load situation, real time, it's telling him exactly which dock door that he needs to go to. So there's, that's once again based on the automation engine. Things change. Whatever the dock door he was told, several hours ago may not be the one that's relevant today, based on the day's activity within that facility. So real time, we're telling him exactly what he needs to do and how he needs to get there. We show him a map of how he needs to get there. So these are the type of technologies that are being utilized from a gate perspective as they interact with a kiosk at the gate, and if you get shown a map, et cetera, et cetera. So all about trying to make it a frictionless and also touchless experience, right? Especially in where we are today.
Definitely, yeah.
So if it's a live load situation, they get told where to go immediately and they go and do that. Or even in the context of if it's a drop, we tell them exactly where they need to drop. But once again, from an exception perspective, do you think that drivers flawlessly execute and drop assets where they're told to drop?
No,
probably not.
So the humans getting in the way again, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the pieces of technology as part of the gate transaction is they put a tag on their asset, right? An RFID tag is put on their asset, and then they drive in and they drop it. So they don't really need to do anything from that perspective. They can just leave or pick up whatever other load and leave the facility. But in the context of what happens then is, we know what's in that facility. We have a 99.99% certainty as to where that asset is and how long it's been there. We know the life of the asset. We know asset utilization. We've got all of these pieces of information associated with that asset. But to verify that asset is in that facility and where it is, our sensor platform and our IP is, rather than install a Wi-Fi network or an active RFID or some triangulation, real-time localization system, within infrastructure within that facility. We put a sensor package actually on yard trucks, right? The material handling equipment in the facility. Could be a yard truck, could be a pickup truck, could be whatever equipment that's used to operate that yard. We put a sensor platform on that, and as that equipment is moving around in the facility, as that yard truck is moving around in that facility, it's illuminating and triangulating all the assets that it sees. Okay, so as it's moving, I'm pinpointing where everything is in that facility and validating and automatically doing yard checks all the time. So as I'm doing my job as a yard truck driver, moving things around, I'm also checking everything in the yard at the same time. It's looking at everything in the yard.
Okay.
And that's really what our underlying platform does. So when I get from my yard truck, once again, I've got a tablet in my yard truck. It's kind of like once again, like a telematic experience or like a Google Map experience.
Right.
And I get instructions fed to me saying, hey, you need to move this asset. Here's your work instruction. You can prioritize your queue. I can dispatch to certain operators in the yard that are operating, different sections of the yard. I can do all sorts of rules associated with that. But as a yard truck driver, I'm fed instructions, a queue of instructions, and I go and execute them. And it tells them what to do, and it tells them where the asset is, where they need to move it to, and that's how it gets, dropped to the dock door on time. And obviously, we're tracking the productivity of that yard truck driver because of all the sensors that are on that yard truck, and we're instrumenting everything associated with what that yard truck driver is doing. So ultimately, by the way, going off on a tangent, is the same instructions that we're feeding a person. Ultimately, we'll be feeding a automated yard truck because we're working on some pilots around that as well. So today, it's a person receiving and directing those instructions or executing those instructions. In the future, it could be an automated piece of equipment, and we're working on those projects as well.
Okay, is that something you guys are doing in-house, or you're partnering with another company?
Well, there's a few providers out there that are just focusing on the yard truck automation. Right, we do have experience in robotics, but certainly an automated truck is a very focused piece of technology, and that's something that's not our core business. We're focused on process automation and not necessarily automated vehicles. That's probably a little bit far off from our core focus.
Okay,
but we are certainly working with those that are doing those vehicles, and as I say, there's a couple out there.
We talked to one previously on the podcast. That's why I was curious.
Yeah, so we're probably having the conversation with the people that you're talking to. So yes, for sure. They know, a lot of people know us just because of our, we're the number one yard management solution provider. So it makes sense based on our customers, and we've got some good overlap. So yeah, we're collaborating with the top ones. And then obviously we get the asset to the door, and then it's unloaded or loaded, and then of course the yard truck driver or the driver that's waiting to be picking up the load is messaged to pick up the load, and then out it goes. And then once again, the outbound experience is similar to the inbound. The outbound could be touchless from the perspective of they don't interact with anybody because the gate arm automatically opens up based on knowing who's leaving with what load, and as part of the transaction, they deposit the tag that was assigned to the asset on the way in, and that's part of the outbound transaction. They won't be able to leave the facility without doing that, or they go through a security process with somebody, and they or through the shipping office, and out they go and on their merry way. But there's a lot of, as you can imagine, there's a lot of complexity associated with the operations as they operate within the facility, right? Some of these facilities have 20 plus yard trucks, and what does that mean? I mean, some of these facilities are just huge and very dangerous, right? If you don't know what you're doing and how you're operating that facility, safety is important, sustainability is important. So we can help make sure that you operate that yard and reduce empty miles much more effectively. As you can imagine, and this is part of the yard is never really a focus for many operations, including those that own a lot of real estate.
Right.
They typically design based on what's inside the four walls, and they design for the capability and complexity and the automation inside the four walls, and they really don't do any planning associated with yard operations, and that's why people struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, we have large companies that are operating some yards over 100% capacity.
Wow.
And how do you do that? So it's not something that people have had a lot of understanding of this area, but people are getting more educated. As I say, it's still emerging market. It's still accelerating. It's been an area that's only recently got covered by Gartner the past 2 or 3 years. They created a market guide. There is no magic quadrant associated with yard management today. That may change as in the future, but today, it's not. It's shifting in terms of typically being an extension of the warehouse, because a lot of people store goods out in the yard.
Yeah.
And is more, as I say, more aligned to network, because it's more aligned to velocity and delivering on time. Delivering on time in full. So it's becoming more aligned to a transportation network as opposed to a warehouse. So its focus and its importance is going to get more elevated as time goes on, and that's validated by the customer engagements that we have. As I say, typically, customers will look at their technology infrastructure and say, okay, am I going to do a suite application, or am I going to do best in class? Those that are operating at scale understand best in class, based on the fragmented solution providers out there, is still the way to go, right? So what would that mean? Well, TMS would be Oracle, WMS would be Manhattan or JDA or Blue Yonder, and YMS would be Pinc. That would be it. We wouldn't be the first on the list, but definitely from a YMS perspective, it would be us, enterprise.
All right, interesting. Yeah, and thank you for taking us through, I guess, the whole process there of how the YMS would help flow the asset through. So, and I think it's pretty interesting, the point you have there about, people don't really consider the yard when they're designing and thinking about the overall flow of the operation, and it's pretty interesting. And you said something interesting earlier on in the podcast about the four walls, but then you have the four fences too, which you said, and I think that's really, really interesting thing to call out there, because we are so focused on the four walls and the inside of the four walls that we forget about that space outside, which is essentially almost like a outdoor warehouse too, because we're storing goods there. We have goods there, and we have assets there as well that we need to take care of. So I think you have some really good points about the importance of the YMS. It's already important, but it's important that other companies see the visibility of the importance and call that to their attention, because it can make such a difference. And you're saying with yards with 100% utilization, I mean that's crazy. I can't even imagine the shifting and the confusion that probably happens there if they don't have some kind of system that's kind of helping them guide through all those pain points of that full capacity. So really, really interesting. And so I'm curious, through the pandemic and everything, supply chain has kind of been, there's been like a spotlight on supply chain almost. A lot of industries, it's been a bad time for them, but for us in supply chain and distribution, you had mentioned before, e-commerce has picked up because demand from customers who are stuck at home and can't go to a store for a while has kind of spiked that as well, and consumer behavior has changed a bit. So, and you guys recently secured some additional funding as well to kind of, I guess, solidify that idea and, the importance of supply chain right now. So talk to us a little bit about, what does the future for Pinc hold, and what's the plan for that investment, and what do you guys have in mind? You mentioned a little bit about automation in terms of the assets within the yard, but what else is growth look like for you guys?
Yeah, that's very good. So there's two questions there that I think they're extremely important questions. So first, what has the pandemic done to supply chain? And as we all know, it really has accelerated the adoption of online sales, right? So
Right.
when you look at, I keep on using these numbers, and when you look at the consumer, typically they've got, what do we got? Over 4 million stores. The store count isn't increasing, it's decreasing. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
some of those stores are actually getting reconfigured to be part of distribution, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
you've seen maybe some stories around what Amazon's trying to do with some of the assets around JCPenney and
Yeah.
others, trying to get some micro fulfillment. So the distribution count of 100,000 plants and warehouses isn't going down; it's going to go up. And what's going to happen? Well, in terms of being able to deliver on expectations, you'll see a lot more capabilities, whether or not that's repurposed malls or stores around micro fulfillment, getting close to the customer and accelerating that. Um, we will definitely see a lot more of that. In fact, if I just go off on a tangent a little bit here, in terms of one of our customers is very much a brick and mortar apparel manufacturer and manufacturing, and
Mm-hmm.
they have their own stores. Very significant brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wearing them today. You're probably wearing them too. So very significant brand. So what they had to do during the pandemic was, obviously the stores had to shut down, and everything was driven online. So they had significant online activity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they've got significant distribution, but they had so much inventory that were flowing to the stores that had to come back and had to go somewhere. Well, all this inventory is in trailers. So we actually had to expand. They actually had to acquire more land for yards to be able to keep up with all this inventory, coming back and coming into the network, from the manufacturing plants. And so they've been doing a very significant and very successful pivot in terms of driving more online sales, but the utilization of our systems has just gone up because of that. So to your point, the pandemic has been interesting, and we've seen, because we're well represented across all industry verticals, what did that mean from a volume perspective? Since we're connected to all our customers, we even see them using the system, perhaps an opportunity for them to improve the usage of the system, and more importantly, we actually see the usage. So we knew very before the news, we could see what was going on with automotive, how that was slowing down and stopped. What was going on with grocery, what was going on with food manufacturing, what was going on with beverage. And it was very interesting that one of the world's largest alcohol manufacturers, the volume that they were doing, right? Because what was everybody doing at home? Ordering groceries, drinking a lot of alcohol.
Yeah.
So we actually see a lot of this. And so in terms of we didn't have a lot of customers having a financial impact. In fact, we had minimal impact associated with that. More importantly, there's I would say the interest level has gone up, because once again, it's been a problem area, and they're dealing with a lot of problems associated with all of these trailers, and they just don't know what they're doing. And so the interest level has gone up. However, the ability to close deals is still a little bit slow. People are still distracted, but I would say, for sure, all of the volumes across all industry verticals, automotive and everything, is above pre-pandemic levels. Now, the only question is, do we have a second dip? Do we have another shutdown?
Yeah.
What is the future risk? And so we're eyes wide open and well aware of that. So we're looking at that. So the pandemic, if anything, has accelerated the focus and the need to have technology enablement around unsophisticated elements in your supply chain, yard being one of them, and that's a good thing. And so we're looking forward to that. Now, going back to what you were saying around where we're going, well, So it's interesting, right? So not a lot of people know anything about yard management. Not a lot of people know about the incumbents in the space. Not a lot of people know about the value that it could provide in the enterprise. And what people typically focus on is warehouse and transportation.
Right.
Well, the warehouse is a very fragmented and competitive space, and so we steer well clear of trying to encroach into the warehouse from a technology perspective.
Okay.
And as I pointed out earlier, we are more aligned to transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the opportunity, it was interesting. You know, we have a very curious and very thoughtful private equity company that approached us towards the end of 2019 with a thesis that totally resonated with what we were interested in doing, and that was how do you create a valuable enterprise, supply chain execution platform, coming in at the supply chain with a vector that's not been done before, and that was nodes on the network, and then accelerate from that based on driving that value proposition that we already know is delivering enterprise value. Going back to what I was saying earlier, more than 10% value, cost reduction on transportation. Taking that value proposition and expanding on that with more technology enablement, or more, shall we say, a roll up of capabilities around near adjacencies to that. So fundamentally, what that means is there's opportunity to consolidate on the nodes on the network, and then there's an opportunity to roll up specific transportation-related technologies that would emphasize creating more and delivering more value to our customers and the customers of the companies that we acquire. And really create a very interesting and unique company that would align itself to some of the big strategics out there already, right? So some of the big suite firms would be very interested in an asset like ourselves, but that's not to say that would be the only exit for this roll-up strategy when we get to that. But we have a 4+ year journey of a very thoughtful roll-up strategy, coming in at nodes on the network, focused on supply chain execution, with a lot of curiosity around transportation-related technologies that not the typical transportation management systems companies would be looking at. And I think that's without being too specific, is the opportunity for Pinc and to expand in the market and get that brand to be even more well known than it's been to date. And we're all very excited about that. And as I say, we've got a very curious and very thoughtful and very excited private equity company that's working with us on that.
All right, and that's all great news too. I'm excited to see what happens in the future, and I think from what you're saying, it sounds like the focus on the yard is just starting to pick up a little more, which I think is overdue. I think you probably agree too. But it's really good to hear what you guys are doing and what you guys are also planning to do in the future. I'm curious. I got one more question for you before we wrap up here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The name Pinc. Where does the name Pinc come from?
Yeah, that's typically the first question that people ask. But yeah, no, look, it is very interesting. I remember when I first joined the company, it's like, hey, should we change this? Because people ask the question, is it Pinc or Pinc? Every time we have a conversation with those that really don't know us. And the origins of that is based on our core technology. We were all about understanding the position of assets in space. So its position, Inc., was really got consolidated to Pinc, and the Pinc, as you know, is an easy word, and it's easy for people to understand. It's kind of a strong name, and when people refer to us, they don't say I'm using the YMS, I'm using Pinc, right? it's kind of like, hey, can you Google this, right? So it's, can you Pinc this? It's stuck with us, and but yeah, that's the origins. It's around positioning of assets.
Okay.
At the time of filing in California, I think that name existed, so we just went with Pinc, and we've stuck with Pinc ever since. And it's stuck with us, and we do have to explain it. So, but nonetheless, we haven't felt compelled to change the name because it is a very strong brand for us, and we'll continue to use it. So yeah, that's the origins of Pinc.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Yeah. I was curious there. So thank you so much for talking to us today. How can people find out more information about Pinc?
Absolutely. So clearly, you can just search for us online, come to our website at pinc.com, pinc.com, or even send me a message at matt@pinc.com, matt@pinc.com. And I'll be happy to help anybody that has any questions about what we do, how we do it, who we do it for, and be happy to help and engage with anybody. Yeah.
All right, great. And we'll put all the information at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So Matt, thank you much for joining me today, and have a good one.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.